Good afternoon, everyone, and today we're reading our final chapter in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Super sad because I love this book. I'm sad it's over, but this is a great chapter, so make sure you're listening close. Make sure you're paying close attention because in this last chapter, Charlie has a really important decision to make. And I'm curious to know what decision you would make if you were Charlie. So, when I first read this book and then reread it again when I was older, I always disagreed with Charlie. I don't know why, but it seems like the decision he made, I questioned it. It seemed crazy to me. So I just want you to think about the decision Charlie has to make in this last chapter. Before we start reading, let's go back, and I asked you to think about Willy Wonka and what type of character is he? Is he a happy character? Is he a sad character? I immediately think, oh, he seems really happy. He's so excited about everything. But the more I read, the more I think he is actually the loneliest, saddest character maybe ever. He must be so lonely, and you can tell he doesn't know how to talk to people. He fights with the parents. He gets mad at the kids. He doesn't seem like that nice of a guy. He basically has slaves, Oompa Loompas, that he stole. He locks his factory down. It doesn't seem like he knows how to talk to anyone. He doesn't have any friends. So, the more I think about it, the more I think Willy Wonka is not really happy. He must be miserable and lonely. And I wonder if you think the same thing. At first he seemed happy, but now I think he's a lonely, lonely man. And, let's read the final chapter. Chapter 30, Charlie's Chocolate Factory. The great glass elevator was now hovering high over the town. Inside the elevator stood Mr. Wonka, Grandpa Joe, and little Charlie. "How I do love my chocolate factory," said Mr. Wonka, gazing down. Then he paused, and he turned around and looked at Charlie with a most serious expression on his face. "Do you love it too, Charlie?" he asked. "Oh, yes," cried Charlie. "I think it's the most wonderful place in the whole world." "I am very pleased to hear you say that," said Mr. Wonka, looking more serious than ever. "Hold on a second. He seems like he's acting a little different. He's acting serious. This is not like Willy Wonka. Something important's coming, because he's acting different. Usually he's rushing and so quick. Now he's acting serious." He went on, staring at Charlie. "Yes," he said, "I am very pleased indeed to hear you say that, and now I shall tell you why." Mr. Wonka cocked his head to one side, and all at once the tiny twinkling wrinkles of a smile appeared around the corners of his eyes, and he said, "You see, my dear boy, I have decided to make you a present of the whole place. As soon as you are old enough to run it, the entire factory will become yours." Charlie stared at Mr. Wonka. Grandpa Joe opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. "It's quite true," Mr. Wonka said, smiling broadly now. "I really am giving it to you. That's all right, isn't it?" "Giving it to him?" gasped Grandpa Joe. "You must be joking." "I'm not joking, sir. I'm deadly serious." But why should you want to give your factory to little Charlie?" "Listen," Mr. Wonka said. "I'm an old man. I'm much older than you think. I can't go on forever. I've got no children of my own, no family at all. So who is going to run the factory when I get too old to do it myself? Someone's got to keep it going, if only for the sake of the Oompa Loompas. Mind you, there are thousands of clever men who would give anything for the chance to come in and take over for me, but I don't want that sort of person. I don't want a grown-up person at all. A grown-up won't listen to me. He won't learn. He will try to do things his own way and not mine. So I have to have a child. I want a good, sensible, loving child, one to whom I can tell all my most precious candy-making secrets while I am still alive." So here we get to see Willy Wonka, and that's why I asked you if you thought he was lonely. He basically admits he has no family. He must be lonely. He's really admitting it right here. "So that's why you sent out those golden tickets," cried Charlie. "Exactly," said Mr. Wonka. "I decided to invite 5 children to the factory, and the one I liked the best at the end of the day would be the winner." "But Mr. Wonka," stammered Grandpa Joe, "do you really and truly mean that you are giving this whole of this enormous factory to little Charlie? After all, "There's no time for arguments," cried Mr. Wonka. "We must go at once and fetch the rest of the family, Charlie's father and his mother and anyone else that's around. They can all live in the factory from now on. They can all help to run it until Charlie is old enough to do it by himself. Where do you live, Charlie?" Charlie peered down through the glass elevator at the snow-covered houses that lay below. "It's over there," he said, pointing. "It's that little cottage right on the edge of the town, that tiny little one." "I see it," cried Mr. Wonka, and he pressed some more buttons and the elevator shot down towards Charlie's house. "I'm afraid my mother won't come with us," Charlie said sadly. "Why ever not?" "Because she won't leave Grandma Josephine and Grandma Georgina and Grandpa Joe." "But they must come too." "They can't," Charlie said. "They're very old and they haven't been out of bed for 20 years. "Then we'll take the bed along as well, with them inside," said Mr. Wonka. "There's plenty of room in this elevator for a bed." "You couldn't get the bed out of the house," said Grandpa Joe. "It won't go through the door." "You mustn't despair," cried Mr. Wonka. "Nothing is impossible. You watch." The elevator was now hovering over the roof of the Bucket's little house. "What are you going to do?" cried Charlie. "I'm going right on in to fetch them," said Mr. Wonka. "How?" asked Grandpa Joe. "Through the roof," said Mr. Wonka, pressing another button. "No!" shouted Charlie. "Stop!" shouted Grandpa Joe. Crash went the elevator right down through the roof of the house into the old people's bedroom. Showers of dust and broken tiles and bits of wood and cockroaches and spiders and bricks and cement went raining down on the three old ones who were lying in bed, and each of them thought that the end of the world was coming. Grandma Georgina fainted. Grandma Josephine dropped her false teeth. Grandpa George put his head under the blanket, and Mr. and Mrs. Bucket came rushing in from the next room. Wow. So Willy Wonka said, "You're going to get my factory." They're in the glass elevator, and Charlie said, but my family won't be able to come. And what does Mr. Wonka do? "Don't worry about it. I'm just going to crash right through your house and terrify the poor old people and take the bed with them. Yeah, I know they can't walk. Don't worry. They'll just grab the bed, put it in this glass elevator, and then go back to the factory." What? How do you feel about that? These poor old people are laying in bed in the house. I know it's not the best house, but, I mean, they must be used to it. Do you think they want to go in this glass elevator and go to a chocolate factory? No, they can't even get out of bed. This seems insane to me. "Save us!" cried Grandma Josephine. "Calm yourself, my darling wife," said Grandpa Joe, stepping out of the elevator. "It's only us." "Mother!" cried Charlie, rushing into Mrs. Bucket's arms. "Mother, listen to what's happened. We're all going back to live in Mr. Wonka's factory, and we're going to help him run it, and he's giving it all to me. And, what are you talking about?" said Mrs. Bucket. "Just look at our house," cried poor Mr. Bucket. "It's in ruins." "My dear sir," said Mr. Wonka, jumping forward and shaking Mr. Bucket's hand warmly, "I'm so very glad to meet you. You mustn't worry about your house. From now on, you're never going to need it again anyway." "Who is this crazy man?" screamed Grandma Josephine. "He could have killed us all." "This," Grandpa Joe said, "is Mr. Willy Wonka himself." It took quite a time for Grandpa Joe and Charlie to explain to everyone exactly what had been happening to them all day. And even then, they all refused to ride back to the factory in the elevator. "I'd rather die in my bed," shouted Grandma Josephine. "So would I," cried Grandma Georgina. "I refuse to go," announced Grandpa George. So they're saying no. No, 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 no. I refuse to. What do you think's going to happen? I would say you should listen to your elders and your grandparents when they refuse. Do you think Charlie's going to listen? Do you think Mr. Wonka is going to listen? I don't know. So Mr. Wonka and Grandpa Joe and Charlie, taking no notice of their screams, simply pushed the bed into the elevator. They pushed Mr. and Mrs. Bucket in after it. Then they got in themselves. Mr. Wonka pressed a button, the doors closed, Grandma Georgina screamed, and the elevator rose up off the floor and shot through the hole in the roof, out into the open sky. Charlie climbed onto the bed and tried to calm the three old people who were still petrified with fear. "Please don't be frightened," he said. "It's quite safe, and we're going to the most wonderful place in the world." "Charlie's right," said Grandpa Joe. "Will there be anything to eat when we get there?" asked Grandma Josephine. "I'm starving. The whole family is starving." "Anything to eat?" cried Charlie, laughing. "Oh, you just wait and see." And that is the end of our book. And here's our picture. We see Grandpa Joe. Remember, he's so excited. Remember how he said, "Oh, I can't get out of bed. I can't get up," until Charlie found the golden ticket. And then what did Grandpa Joe do? Whippy! Oh, all of a sudden I can walk. Like, hey, Grandpa Joe, you could have walked this whole time, but you decided to start walking once the golden ticket came. Remember that? How we talked about how Grandpa Joe was basically lying to all of us. So Charlie's decision, what decision did he have to make? He got offered this factory. Now, I always thought you listen to your parents, your grandparents. A little boy shouldn't be making a decision like this. Grandpa Joe should have stepped in and said, "No, you're not going to go ruin my house. I don't care if we get the factory. You know, you're not taking these old people who are bedridden and taking them." And I was always surprised at that decision that Charlie made. He just seemed to say, "Yeah," and didn't question it, and they ruined the house. And what a strange ending to me. Was it a happy ending, do you think? Are you happy? I mean, it's a great book. I love talking about it. I could talk about it forever, as you can see. I hope you enjoyed it. Talk about it with your family. Watch the movie because we're inside for so long. You can rent it. There's the original and then the newer one. I really like the book's better, but still, you can watch the movie, talk about it with your family, and our next read aloud, I haven't decided what book yet, I think I know, but we're going to start our next afternoon read aloud after April break, so that way it'll be consistent, because we're not going to be doing anything on April break. So for a week, we won't be doing any afternoon read alouds. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will be doing this after April break.